Hello and welcome back to our series on beginning app script for HR, brought to you by Prairie HR Solutions. My name is Jake Finger, Principal Consultant here at Prairie HR Solutions. And in these last few videos here, we have a few things that I would like to go over for our beginning app script series. And one of those is loops, which we'll get to towards the end. And then another is diving in a little bit more to our formatting options, as well as finishing up what we started here. I don't want to just leave that. So what we did is we have a series of cascading drop downs, each dependent on its previous one. And when we select division level in the people analytics drop down, it creates a new drop down. And we can simply come down here and select a division. And right now we currently have our function set up to where it's just going to grab that value and put it here in a UI. What I would like to do is work on creating and populating this just like we did previously with employee headcount. And we're not going to need any of this really because it's only going to be one division, but I'd like to take the value of that third drop down, which is the division, and put it up here and then format it differently. And then also populate another field here that states it's a compensation average, and then we will work on building that compensation average function to produce the average here for that division. And then we can also do the same thing to our company level here. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's jump into our code here. So we're not wanting to populate this alert right here. And this value is an argument that is being passed to this function from another function. And this is our onEdit function up here. And what this onEdit else if is doing is it's looking for that A5 cell. That is that third level drop down. So if something happens in that third level drop down, we are wanting to essentially get the value of that and then run this code here, pop div data, and then populate it. Or send it down in an argument, which comes down here to our pop data. So instead of writing this alert, we would like to populate that in a cell. And we need to get the range of that cell. Now that cell is directly above our employee headcount. So since it's above or less one row, we can just simply use 1-4. And now once we get that range, we want to set the value of that to what is being passed. And then we're also going to have to do some formatting stuff here. So we notice that everything else is bolded and italic. So let's not use italic or bold for right now. Let's just set the background color of that cell to black and the font to white. So let's set the font first. So let's set font color. That's a method, and we can either use this hex or CSS notation is what they're calling it. Or we can just simply, if it's a common color, we can just type it out there. So let's type that out there. Black. Now, I've covered this in other videos, but I'm not sure I've covered it here. When you're writing a string, you can either use double or single quotations. You just have to make sure it's consistent. So we couldn't do double quotations here and then single quotations, but you could use the same, and it could either be double or single. So if you're looking for references, or maybe watching another video or whatnot and they're using double or single, it's the same thing, works fine. And then so we got the font color not set to black because that's already what it is set as. We want to set that to white, but then we want to set the background color to black. Now remember, we're going to have to work on clearing this depending on the situation, but let's just make sure that this works now. So let's save this and come back over to our sheet, make sure it's functioning. Okay, let's refresh and we'll go people analytics, division level. Now when we select a division, let's say HR, it should populate HR. So now we can work on clearing that when we need to. As you can see, it clears it, but it's this thing is still here, which I guess we can leave it as long as it doesn't have anything populated in there. But now we need to put that employee head count in here. So let's go back to our code and let's simply grab this and put it down there. And then let's create another line underneath it because we'll have the employee head count. But what we're wanting to have is in the row below it, let's call it salary average for now. Salary average. Okay, good. So now we have our frame and our heading set up for our div data. Now what we need to do is go over and grab some information. And we need to grab information based on what this value is. So what we can do is we can write an if statement, our trusty if statement. And actually, let's not write an if statement because we've been using if statements. And since we're not really building anything, we can take this opportunity to see how a switch statement would work. So let's use a switch statement instead of an if statement in practice. You remember over in our reference side, we've had a switch statement syntax, and it's right here. So what we can do is just grab this, come back over to our code, and populate it in here to use. So what we're going to want to do is we are going to declare switch, and then we need the expression. So the expression is our value. That is what we're checking. And if that value, the case is, if the value is finance, now remember switch works strictly equal to. So this is the same thing as saying if, strictly equal to. So if that equals to finance, then what we would like to do is we would like to run a block of code. And then if the next value is equal to, say, what was it, HR, then we want to run another line of code or another set of instructions. And then if it is IT, we want to run another set of instructions. And if it is, forgetting our marketing, operations, and sales. Okay. Keep forgetting about marketing. Marketing, break, strictly equal to operations. Want to run something else. And the last one we have is our trusty sales team. So good. Okay, good. Okay, so we don't need that. So now what we can start doing is working on building our code out here. So if it's finance, we want to essentially come up and grab our employee data and then filter it down to finance. And we filtered it already right here. And that put it in a new array. So we can use the same concept just for the sake of repetitive usage of writing this instruction line. So let's call finance data, fin data, is going to equal that employee data, and we want to filter that. And what we want to filter, it's going to take that callback function. What we are going to want to filter is not the third, well, it is going to be the third index because that's the division. And we can use, instead of calling this division, let's just call it D, because that's what we're going to do. We can just abbreviate it. So we can say D. And what we're wanting to do is come over here, and you'll have to see that this, we're not going to hard code it. This is going to be that argument that we pass, that value. So it's going to look something like this. We are going to return D if the third index is strictly equal to value. So in the case of value equaling finance, we're going to run this code here. And what we're going to want to do with this new variable that's being stored is we want to map that based on our salary. So this variable only contains the data that is in finance. Now, we only have one employee. If you remember, we have one employee inside finance, so this should be fairly easy. And then what we can do to make sure that this works is let's just alert it out, and let's just call that data. So let's save this and see how that works. Might throw an error because there's no guts here, but we'll see. Should just overlook it. We'll see what happens. So we'll create our dropdown. Refresh it here. We should probably clear that. Or I don't know, we can leave it. I know I'm going to end up having to clear that because I can see it bothers me every time. Okay, division. And now we selected finance. So if we go finance, it does exactly what it was that we were doing. So it's pulling this one employee and all their information. So now if we want to get all of the appropriate employees, yep, and there it goes. Headcount, salary average, good. Finance, there we go. If we want to get the salaries of these employees, so we have to go over 0. Ooh, okay, so it looks like it's index number 21. We want from that filtered array, that new one that's drilling down by finance, we want to get an array of all the salaries. Because in order to do an average, we need to add up all of those salaries and then divide by the length of that array, or how many salaries we have. So let's come back to our code here, and it's the 21st index. So what we can do is, instead of this alert here, let's take that fin data and let's come up here or back over to our reference, because we did map prior, and let's just find it so we can refresh our memory. So what map is doing, it is creating a new array with only the elements at whatever index we're given. So this should be 21. So let's go back to our code and do just that. And we will create yet another variable, and we will call this fin salary. And we're going to take not the employee data. We are looking at this new data that is the filtered version of that employee data. So we can do fin data.map. This map is going to take a callback function, and we'll just say it's S for salary. And this callback function is going to return S at, what do we say, 21, the 21st index. And now what we can do is do a UI alert and see what that populates. So fin salary. Okay, there we go. So now let's save this and then see what is actually populating. So let's refresh, make sure we pick that code up. People analytics, division, and our division, we are wanting finance. Hourly. Okay, so we're off an index somewhere. So let's go back to our records and figure out. Okay, so it's pay type, so we just need to go back one. So it's 20. So let's come back here and change this. It is not 21, it is simply 20. So now let's save it and go back. That's the problem when you start running it into employee databases and the columns just go out forever. You're trying to figure out the index, but that's why I use that alert so I can see what is being pulled and I can change it instead of having to cycle through and figure out what happened and where it happened. Okay, so people analytics, division. Now this isn't populating initially because we're populating that UI, and that UI tends to pause the code, so to speak, until you hit OK or a certain time has elapsed. So when we hit finance, you'll notice that this thing pops up with that salary, and then it finishes the code. So once we get rid of that UI, this will work. But let's go ahead and populate our employee head count while we're at it. And what we can do there is we now have our employee data filtered right here. It's this fin data, and it's returning that value. So what we can also do is, see, it's returning that. What we can go through and do is we can use our fin data here, which we're already filtering the divisions out through, and we can simply do what we did here for our employee. Let's find it here. Employee data length, but we're not going to do the employee data length. What we're going to do is actually the fin data length. So let's copy this so we don't have to retype it. And after it gets done with all this, or it gets done with that anyway, we can then go to our dashboard, range 2, 5, row 2, column 5, which is next to that employee data or that employee headcount. And instead of having it set with employee data, we want it to be set to this new array, which is the filtered data. So now when we come back over, let's save it and come back over to our sheet here, create a drop down. We'll go through it. So now when we hit finance, it doesn't pop up that box because we got rid of it, and you'll see it speeds it up quite a bit. So it populates fine, and then it puts that employee count here. So what we should do is let's go ahead and copy this for the rest of our divisions here. So let me go back here, and what I'm going to do is I will copy the first one to show exactly how it should look, and then I'll pause the video because nobody wants to watch me do that. So for HR, this isn't going to be Fin. Let's just call it HR. And then let's find out where this is referenced. HR data. And then it's not going to be Fin salary. It'll be HR salary. This isn't Fin data. It's HR data. And that should return that. Yep. That should return that. And then what we can do is instead, since we have this Fin salary, we can simply, well, we're going to have to use that differently. So we'll wait for that. So let's save this and then go back to make sure that HR works. And then I'll pause the video and build out the rest so y'all don't have to watch me do it, because that would be boring. Okay, here we are. Let's give it a shot. And we wanted to do HR, so HR should populate HR, headcount, salary average. Awesome. So I'm going to pause the video and I will build out the rest of those and see you in just a sec. Okay, good. So I went through and I built out the rest of these cases here in our switch. And you'll notice that our mark salary and our op salary, these are grayed out because we haven't called them anywhere yet. And we're going to call them, but first what we need to do is we need to take this mark salary and we'll need to do a calculation on it before we populate it. We got to create, in essence, a function to find the average. But let's make sure that this works. So I saved it. Let's go back over to our sheet. We'll refresh, and we should be able to go through this and select a division. And the division will populate here. Head count. We'll do operations. Okay, we have 2 people there. HR. That changes up there. 4, and finance, we should have our lone financial person. Okay, awesome, great. So now we can get into average. So in order to, let's come back over here to our code. In order for us to find the average of 2 values, we first need to add those 2 values together, and then we need to take the sum of all those values and then divide by how many are there. And I'm going to create another function here to kind of go over how to find an average using Google Apps Script, because it's a little different than what it is that we think, and we're going to have to expose ourselves to a new term that we haven't covered yet. It's one that I tend to use a lot, and you'll find yourself using a lot, but this will be a good primer because the next video we will talk all about it. So when we think of an average is adding everything together and then dividing by the total number there. So let's create numbers. Here we go. And let's make this number equal to a simple array, and that array is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now if we want to add all these together, what we would have to do is we would have to take these either individually and put them in their own variable, like this. 1, let y equals 2. So what we could do is essentially come down here. First, this is going to cause us issues if we don't. There we go. So what we could actually do is come down here and simply log out this and say x plus y. And then if we were to save and run this find average function, it would give us 3. And then if we wanted to add in another one, we would have to write another variable, z equals 3, and then add that down here, plus z. So you can see this can get quite long. So we could do it this way, and then find the sum or the total product or the total sum of this, and then divide it by however long this array is, which is 5. We could do it that way, but as you can see, this kind of takes a bit. This is a long time to create and then to log it out, and each time it's creating this one, creating that one, and then it's going individually. So this is where we insert what's called iterations. And what we are going to do with this is we are going to do essentially a for of loop. And I'm not going to get into loops during this, but I want to give a primer of how to write a loop, because what we want to do is we want to iterate over each one of these values in this array. Not change it like that, but iterate, take 1, add 2 to 1, add 3 to whatever that was, add 4 to whatever that was, 5 to whatever that was, and then take the total sum and then just add it into it a new value, a new variable, so to speak. So how we would do this is we now have numbers in an array. Like again, I'm not going to necessarily go over this in depth, but I want to provide you with a snippet so we can talk about it later. So how we would do this would be, let's declare that sum. And let's just set that sum initially to 0. And then we want to iterate or loop over every value. So how to do that, we're going to do for, that's declaring the for loop. We'll need the parentheses, and then we're going to say let value. Now this is not the value that we used up here, so we may have to change this, but we're saying let the value of, and you'll notice this is blue because this is a for of loop, and the array we're going to use is numbers. And then we want to write a block of code. And what this is saying, so every single value in numbers, we want to run a block of code. And that code, we want to take the sum and we want to add to it. Now this operator, I'll go over this, but what this is saying is just going to keep adding to the older value. We want to add the value to that sum. And then we want to calculate the average, because this will take care of our sum in this for loop here. So let's tab that over. So now we want to just take care of our average. So we want to take the sum and then divide it by the length of this array. So what we can do is simply return, or we can create a variable here and just call it average. And that is going to equal the sum divided by numbers length. And that should give us our average. And when we log this out, this ABG variable, let's save it. And then when we run it, our average should be 3. So let me do some quick math here. So let's see, though 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is equal to 15 divided by 5 is 3. So perfect. So now we got the average. Let me make sure that's out of what it was. Yep, 3. So now we got the average. We can use this to actually take, we can declare numbers. We don't need numbers because our numbers can be the mapped version of our salary, which we already have. So instead of numbers, it would be this. And we can just copy the rest of this over and we would be able to get our average. So I know I'm getting up here on time. It's already past 30 minutes. I like to keep it digestible. So in our next video, what we will do is add that to our script to populate, and then we will dive in and talk all about loops. I know that I just threw a big primer at you, and it might be a little bit confusing, but what we'll do is we will just take this, add it into our script, and then we will dive in depth of what actually is occurring here during this loop. So I hope this has been helpful. If it has been, please hit that subscribe button. And until next time, please take care.